You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
And welcome back to The Social Workers here on WCDB Albany. My name is Eric, and I'm here with Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hey, Eric. Another great show is I'm expecting for today. We have a really awesome guest who has a little bit of history with the Social Workers Radio Talk Show.
We do, and we'll tell you all about our guest in just a minute, but it's the end of the semester, and I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that this has been a challenging semester for everybody, but here at UAlbany, we've made it through, and we are, looking forward to whatever lies ahead for UAlbany.
Yeah. Well, it's been an interesting year because everything kind of closed down, as you know, in March. And I haven't seen you in person in a long time, but we've still had shows regularly throughout this whole year. So for those who are listening, I'm in a podcast studio with the recording board. Eric's calling in and our guests call in via Zoom or phone sometimes. So we've made it work.
And it's been great to keep the Social Workers Show alive during this time. We hope that anyone listening, that you continue to listen and tell other folks about it. And we think it's really important to keep the show going despite all of the ongoing challenges right now.
And as we talk about keeping the show going, this episode is going to focus on sort of bringing it back to the beginning. So, Eric, that will lead us into who is our guest for today.
Absolutely. So our special guest today is Hillary Dolinsky, who is an MSW graduate of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare. She's actually a two-time alumna of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare. She earned her undergraduate degree in 2011 and then went on to earn her master's in social work the following year, 2012. Since college, Hillary has worked in higher education, government, and nonprofit settings. In these roles, she was often the only social worker within the company where she worked. Hillary currently works at the Georgetown University Medical Center as a communications and research administrator and is back in graduate school for a second time to earn her master's in business administration from the Georgetown University McDonough School of Business. Hillary, welcome back to the Social Workers. We'll also tell the audience a little bit more in just a second about your history with this particular show, but welcome back.
Yeah, good morning to both of you. It's great to see you guys again, and thanks for having me.
So you predate us with this show. So we have lots of questions to ask you about your own sort of personal journey into social work, how you got where you are now. But I guess just before we start that off, we'd love to hear about how your history with this particular show with the Social Workers.
Yeah, I remember seeing a flyer for the Social Workers Radio Talk Show when I was a graduate assistant at the campus center for UAlbany. And I was doing my rounds and I thought, wow, that is fascinating and something that I think I could help with in my role as a graduate assistant. I was responsible for sort of getting the word out about activities and also was doing social media and outreach and newsletters, things like that. So I thought, hey, why don't I try to lend my services to Catherine Zacks, who was really championing the Social Workers Radio Talk Show at the time. She has her own history with broadcast radio and all of that. So I thought, this is fascinating, wonderful, innovative, and I want to be a part of it. So I reached out to Catherine purely just to volunteer my services, had absolutely no intention of being on the show, being behind the microphone. But anyone who knows Catherine knows that she has the ability to see potential in people, even if they don't recognize it right away. So I think she saw a little spark of interest in me. So I did help with the outreach. And then it started with, why don't you come on weekly and do a little segment, just 10 minutes. And then throughout my grad school experience, it became, why don't you come on and co-host with me? And I've mentioned it to many people, but I feel like being on the Social Workers Radio Talk Show is really how I learned to communicate well. It helped with presentation skills, effectively getting a message across in a 30-second soundbite, removing those ums or hahs or things like that that can deter from conversation. And on radio, you have no time for those things. So I felt like it was a crash course in all of those skills that have helped me in social work and beyond.
Yeah, and so you've really saw the early part of the history of the show, and then after you left, and Catherine moved on from doing the show, Alyssa and I took it over, and we've been, actually, Alyssa, you were sort of the
Yeah.
transitional.
Yeah. So I think right after Hillary, you had graduated, I started working with Catherine for I think about a year and a half before she transitioned just to do her other show. And you joined me, Eric. So it's been quite a few years. I think for me, it's been what, 7 or 8 years. And I think Eric, we've been 6. So it's been going.
Yeah. And the whole idea, if you're just tuning in and listening for the first time or checking out the podcast for the first time, the whole idea for the show was not just to have a show for social workers, but to have a show for the community and for anyone who might listen about topics that matter to social workers, topics in which social workers are active, topics in which social workers might be making a difference out there in the community. And so there's really a wide net in terms of what we talk about in this show, who we interview, and what subjects we ultimately discuss.
And the whole idea is that the public is the client. And how do we get our message out there to individuals who might never have considered seeing or using a social worker or even knowing what the social work profession is? And that's our way to sort of elevate social work, elevate the profession, and get the word out there.
So Hillary, you're quite an accomplished alumna of the school, and you've achieved quite a bit in your career so far. And continuing going back to school now. But I guess let's go back in time a little bit. And if you could tell us a little bit about how you got interested in social work in the first place and how you found yourself in the School of Social Welfare at the University of Albany.
Yeah, a little bit about my backstory. And I'm sure most social workers have some sort of personal experience in their own history that has either introduced them to social work or really wanted to drive their journey to give back. So growing up, I grew up in a single parent household, got to witness things early on, domestic violence, substance abuse. My older sibling has a developmental disability. So social workers were in my life from start to finish. And when you go through experiences like that, it helps you build resiliency, compassion, empathy. And it also kind of illustrates how important having supports are. So whether it is a social work or even just the systems around you, if they're not designed to help and empower you, you can only make it so far. If you don't have connections to resources, how are you able to then climb and get out of certain circumstances? So I had a great childhood after the early years, and my mom and my sister and I are incredibly close, and still, to this day, they're my best friends. And having that unique perspective sort of to understand what it's like to be in a dark situation, but then to get out of it, really wanted to, I wanted to take that and apply it into my profession. And I went to college. I originally thought, I'll be a special education teacher. But then I thought, I had this epiphany one day of like, what if I know a student is in a situation at home that's not great, and I just, because my job is a teacher and there are limits to that, I have to send them home to some sort of situation and I can't really do anything about it. And I said, no, I need to be on the front lines with them. I don't want to be limited as far as how I can help people. So social work was the calling. Couldn't avoid it. I knew it was there for me. And UAlbany, I grew up in upstate New York, so UAlbany being a nationally ranked school of social welfare and also an hour and a half away from home was just perfect. So I went to UAlbany for the great social work program, got involved in their crisis peer counselor program called Middle Earth. So spent several years there as a peer counselor on their crisis hotline, and also as a resource trainer there. I was involved in residential life, orientation, really cared a lot about the student experience, and also was involved in the honors college. So I got to have the whole rigor of writing a thesis in undergrad and presenting it. And from there, I knew I wanted to get less of a clinical experience. And I wanted to end up more on the macro side of social work. So looking at policies and programs and research. I was very interested in research from my thesis. So wanted to stay at UAlbany, loved it so much. They had the advanced standing program. So I went right into that. I had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 weeks off from undergrad before grad school started, and did a whole calendar year there. Interned at AARP, Alzheimer's Association, got a wide variety of experience there, and really, really loved it.
Well, it sounds like you were an all-star.
Yeah, but it sounds like you really exemplify the sort of intersection that we often find in our social welfare students of personal experience, educational training, and also this, you use the word calling, but this idea of finding something that you want to do with your life, with your career, that matters, that makes a difference. And in some ways, that's what we're all about at the School of Social Welfare, and trying to help people figure that out and figure out how to make a difference. So it's exciting to hear.
And so when you transition to the work world, and one of the things I can relate to is being one of the only social workers in the job sites. I had worked in a school setting for a while. I was the only social worker working with teachers, and then I transitioned to other positions where I was the only social worker. And it seems like you had a similar experience. And I'd like you to talk about that based on your background, going through a lot of our classes and our internships where we're surrounded by social work professionals, and then going into the job field where you're the only one. How was that transition?
That transition really pointed out kind of what of a bubble I was in school. Like you mentioned, being surrounded by social workers, supervised by social workers, taught by social workers, to then go into a workforce that may not know what social work is. And if they have heard of it, they may not know the full capacity of a social worker. So it was a lot of sort of teaching that had to be done of, social work is not just case management. Social work is not just counseling. It's not just helping. There's a lot more depth to it than that. And I felt like in all of those roles, I sort of had to build the credibility around social work for those who may have not been exposed to it. And in my first role, I stayed at UAlbany again, post-grad, and worked for the Center for Technology and Government, which is a research institute that works really closely with the Rockefeller College. And I remember reading in the job description that they were looking for a social worker, and I was thrilled because the position was not clinical social work at all. It was a research study on youth who were transitioning out of foster care, and it was a cohort study, multi-year grant project with the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. And I remember thinking, yes, they get it. They know that social work is all-encompassing. And so in my interview, I asked, what made you want to hire a social worker? And they said, the person before was a social worker. And I was like, well, that's great. But maybe they didn't fully, they obviously saw the value in having a social worker in that role, but maybe not to the extent that I thought. And then I loved working on that project because I was surrounded by these brilliant people. The leadership at CTG are some of the nationally ranked scholars, academics in technology and government and that area. So I felt like, wow, I'm surrounded by these really aspirational people, and they're getting to learn about social work from a social worker. And they were very open to it and excited to hear about my experiences. And I got to sort of walk the line because their niche was technology. So building databases, and with our study, we basically had to take all this data about youth in foster care and put it into the system, and then figure out how to work with caseworkers to get this survey completed. And I got to bring more of the real day-to-day knowledge of what a caseworker does, what a youth in foster care might experience. No, they're probably not going to answer the phone and want to take a survey from a stranger. Caseworkers are overburdened, so how can we integrate this into what they're already doing? I got to sort of highlight some of those things that they may not have been aware of prior. So that was a very positive experience. And we were actually able to transition that whole project back to UAlbany, but in I think it's Center for Social Research, or Rose Green's office.
Center for Human Services Research. Yeah.
Yes. So after we built the foundation and sort of the framework for that project, we thought, why don't we house it back in some place that really has that expertise? So we were able to transition it over there. I believe it's still an active project over there. So I'm really, really proud of that. And then from there, my family relocated to Boston, and I had the opportunity to work at a nonprofit technology startup, which is as interesting as it sounds, especially for a social worker. So I was full-time employee number 3 on the team, and I got to really, again, bring the personal experience to it. So it was a place called Exceptional Lives, where we built online resource guides for parents who had children with disabilities, specifically intellectual, but also physical disabilities. And our product was to connect them to services. So we would pitch it as almost a TurboTax of figuring out what services you qualify for. So you fill out this interactive platform, you answer yes, no, you input your information, and it would spit out a guide for you saying, based on your answers, you qualify for Mass Health, which is the Medicaid for Massachusetts, or you qualify for these independent living services, or don't forget to talk about these things at your IEP meeting at school with special education. And I loved that job because I got to, again, just kind of bring the social work to it, the human element to it, and also work with these engineers and web developers and people who may have never been exposed to that, and start to ask them some questions that I remember sitting in some meetings thinking like, oh, well, a parent who is stressed out to the max, and even with the data we saw our frequent users were parents who were looking at our guides between midnight and 2 a.m. And they thought, oh, that's weird. It must be something wrong with our system. And I said, no, I think that's the only time that these parents have to actually sit down and do these things. And so I got to really play an active role in making our products usable for parents. I got to lead focus groups with parents of testing out our project and our product with them. And it was just an incredible experience. But the startup life is a little hectic, of sort of everyone does a little bit of everything, and the deadline is always yesterday, and just trying to get funding and all of that is a little bit of a stressful environment. But it really illuminated to me that I think there is an intersect between business and social work. I think both industries could benefit from a little more of each other. And I felt like, I'm really interested in sort of operations and strategic thinking and planning, but keeping social work central to that. So I thought, why not get some finance experience, get some budgeting experience, and think about going back to grad school, depending on how that went. So when we relocated to DC, I got a position at the Georgetown Medical Center as a research administrator, where my main responsibility is accounting and the financial management of our funding that comes from NIH. So I love my spreadsheets. I have all my plans and everything. I'm not doing social work quite as much in the day-to-day, although I will say I feel like I social work my peers and colleagues and still bring that problem-solving kind of communications aspect to my work. And then from there, decided to apply for business school and got into the MBA program at Georgetown, which is known for being more of a human-centric MBA program compared to some of the other programs out there.
Interesting. So it's interesting to hear you talk about this intersection of business and social work, because at the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, we have combined programs where students can get a degree in law and social work, and public health and social work, and criminal justice and social work. But we don't often talk about that intersection of business and social work. And so, historically, the social work profession comes from a place of public sector work and of what we think of, historically as nonprofit work, or work that might be conceptualized as not relating to business per se, but more relating to human services and nonprofit generation. So I guess I'd like to hear a little more about your thoughts on that, and sort of how do these two things, where does the rubber meet the road with that intersection?
Yeah, through my experience, I got a front row seat of sort of understanding the implications of not having a business mindset in the nonprofit world or in the public sector. You do need to think strategically. There are some hard decisions that have to be made, and balancing economics and ethics is extremely important. And it is hard to sometimes make the case for the human element when there's a high cost associated to it. Getting businesses or companies or even nonprofits, it still happens there, to think about the intangible assets or benefits of a certain decision, that yes, it may cost more money, but look at all of this benefits and look at the long-term effects of it. And the opposite of that, I had also witnessed through internships and my professional experience of, you could have the best mission statement possible at your nonprofit, but if you don't know how to obtain funding and plan and operate efficiently with the dollars you have, as well as grow that, you're only going to be able to go so far. And it's not a reflection of your goals. It's not a reflection of the work you do, but that business mindset has to be there in order for you to do the work that you want to do. So I'm seeing now that I've been in business school just for a couple of months here, that the private sector has over the past couple of years started to embrace more human-centric or public sector work. A lot of the major banks and businesses now have whole departments for corporate social responsibility, where I think initially, maybe 10 years ago, it was more about just doing good for the community. But it has really grown into now doing good for the community and internally for your employees, taking care of them, nurturing them, not just focusing on dollars and cents and metrics and achievements, but really having a mission and a personality to your business that is more than just dollars. So I'm seeing now there is a lot of growth in corporate social responsibility, in sustainability, in social impact. So nonprofit consulting, getting that public sector attitude and thought into the business world. And they have been, I feel like public sector and private have been very, not adversarial, but compartmentalized, where there haven't been a lot of gaps in between them. And I just think that now I've seen it over the last couple of years. And I also think with how 2020 has gone, there has been more of a push for that to make it a priority.
Great. Alyssa?
No, it just seemed, I love listening to how, when we go into social work school, I talk to some students and they want to have this plan right away of what they're going to be doing in 5 years, 10 years. And I love how you took each experience, and it's a great example for students, how you took each experience with each job, everything you were learning, and that changed your path along the way. And I think that's something that's also really important for students to know when you're looking at that plan of what you want to do. And you can have goals, but things shift as you go into situations, you go into jobs. When you were at that nonprofit and that startup, and you realized, hey, I need to have a little bit of background in the business aspect, and how that changed your trajectory a little bit. So I think that was also it captured that really important concept of, you don't always have to know exactly what you're going to do, and you have to sort of go with the flow and see where each path takes you.
Yes, that's been a mantra of mine since I finished graduate school, and it's sometimes out of necessity, but also just environments change, people change, culture changes, all of that, and you sort of have to be flexible with that. When I finished grad school, I was such a you've heard of type A people. I would refer to myself as a type A plus person, where I was just next level of, gotta do everything and be perfect and whatever. And then I finished graduate school, and the workforce at that time was difficult in 2012. And I didn't have a job lined up right away out of grad school. And I spent 3 months sleeping on my sister's couch. And I thought, oh my God, this is not my plan. Nothing's going right. What did I do wrong? But it allowed me to sort of take a step back and humble myself a little bit, and also be open to different experiences. And, I took the job at CTG, loved it, realized that okay, I've done government, I've done higher education. I haven't done nonprofit work really other than my internships. So let's go get some of that experience. And it just happened to be at a tech startup.
Mm.
So let's get some of that experience. And you do have to be able to pivot, I think, and seize opportunities as they come up. Have a general plan, but be open to receiving different signs that come your way, different opportunities that cross your path.
I mean, I'm sure when you were in grad school, you didn't anticipate being on a radio show either. That was something that was an opportunity that you kind of can jump on, but it wasn't something that was expected. So
no, it wasn't expected, and also not something I associated with social work. I think people have a vision of what social work is, and all of my experiences have basically been, oh, well, social work can be here as well, and it can be here. It can be in different places other than just what you think it's supposed to be. And I have loved that. I've loved pushing social work into areas that it's not meant to be in or not traditionally in, but also kind of getting back to social work and pulling in some of those other areas to it, like radio, like tech startups, like finance. I like stirring that pot and mixing those together.
So it's really interesting to hear you talk, Hillary, because it sounds to me, it really emphasizes for me the fluidity in social work and the responsiveness that the profession has to change. And you mentioned that there's cultural change, there's climate change, there's political change, there's so much going on right now, and then certainly the pandemic. We often try to teach our students and work with our students and learn from our students to come to this realization that social work is ever changing and ever evolving, and that the social work of tomorrow will not be the same as the social work of today. And it seems like you're really, a living example of that you're kind of looking for ways that social work might push out in different directions and intersect with other disciplines. And that to me is really exciting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's important too. It's beneficial to the social work industry to be known in these other components and to start to be respected and valued in places outside of social work or outside of the public sector.
Great. So if you've just tuned in and you're listening to the social workers today, and we certainly hope you are, we've been talking with Hillary Dolinsky. And it's been a great conversation so far. We've got a few more questions for you, Hillary, but Hillary is an alumna of the University of Albany School of Social Welfare, and she's now down in Washington, D.C., working at the Georgetown University Medical Center, and also has just started her MBA degree down at Georgetown University in the McDonough School of Business. So Hillary, I mentioned the pandemic a minute ago. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like for you as a student this semester, a returning student to graduate school, entering a new field, entering the business field, but also doing so in the time of pandemic? What's that been like?
Yeah, it has been difficult, certainly not what I expected, but I think there have been pros and cons to it. So all of my classes right now are online. They're 80 plus students in a Zoom room, just like we are. And it's difficult, at least what I'm experiencing. There's been not only just a learning curve of, all right, I'm a social worker trying to get my MBA, but also I am a social worker trying to get my MBA and learn this content only online and not being able to be in person and just casually grab some of my classmates and go into a study room and talk to them about the concepts we just learned, or grab a professor as we're heading into class and ask some questions there. They've certainly been accommodating, and I feel like professors have had to adapt their plan too. They're just as flustered and overwhelmed as I am as a student in trying to take their content that was taught in person and now make it accessible and effective online. And I found some of the concepts, I'm taking statistics right now and trying to teach myself that on a Zoom meeting is difficult. But thankfully I've been able to connect with some other classmates and we have our own sessions offline, but you have to really seek that out. It doesn't happen intuitively or naturally like it would in person. And it's been interesting also just to realized that I've never met these people in person. I've only seen their tiny square box in a Zoom room, and what would happen if I did just bump into them on the street. And I've enjoyed kind of the sociology aspect of, only being able to see a person's face, or in some instances, only being able to hear their voice, and, how you interact with that differently, or maybe some preconceived notions you're making about people just based on what their room looks like, or based on where they are in their house, or what they look like on camera, or all of these things, right? More inputs are being put in, I think, in that kind of setting. But it has been a little difficult just to feel like a student again. I sit in this chair and do my 9 to 5 at the same computer, and then I go get some food and come back and do night classes. So it doesn't necessarily feel, it's hard to identify as a student quite yet, but I am enjoying the experience. And I think, it's just, as far as note taking, I will say that's been great to do that here on my computer, to kind of be able to take screenshots of things and quickly take notes, whereas in class I probably wouldn't be able to do that. So there are pros and cons to it. But what about you both? Are you both teaching classes online this semester, or have you been?
I have been, yeah. I've been teaching online, and it's, I think, speaking for myself, but also a little bit for some of the other faculty and instructors here at the University at Albany. It's been a challenge, and we're learning as we go too, and we're trying to figure out how to build community with students, how to connect some of those dots. And, just listening to you talk about that perspective as a student and approaching it from a learning position, and from, having that sense of a sociological perspective of kind of like what's going on here, and what's going on socially, educationally, interactionally. There's just so much happening in this new, it's not new, but in this newly implemented, I guess, digital realm where we're not interacting in person. So we're trying to make the best of it and trying to learn as we go. And we constantly talk with each other, and by, I mean, instructors and faculty members, trying to, share lessons and figure out what works in your class, and what are students responding to and what are they not responding to. And we're trying to talk to students too and listen to them and figure out how can we do better with this? What do you need? And the blend between synchronous learning and asynchronous learning is really a complicated recipe, if you will. So we're trying to figure all that out. Yeah.
And it's so much of that self-care piece, and talking, as you just were mentioning, and looking at people's rooms and behind them. I see a bike in your background, and I love biking and running. So I think my question is going to be, what do you do for self-care to get you through this? And I'm hoping it involves that bike, because I love biking.
Oh, it sure does. It involves that bike and that treadmill. That has been a non-negotiable for me, having that time for me, it's exercise. I love endurance running. I love running really far, very slowly. Mm-hmm. And, being able to listen to a podcast or an audiobook and just have that time. And that has been essential to this, especially in a time, you probably both feel this way as well, being how busy you are. But I feel like I'm incredibly efficient with my time when I am overwhelmed in trying to tread water. It's, you only have 24 hours to work with. So if I'm going to exercise, it has to happen in this block, or it's not going to happen. And so it has helped me kind of line up my day and my schedule and things like that. But yes, exercise is my go-to. Yoga and volunteering. This year, I've started volunteering with Special Olympics Virginia. It's something I've wanted to do, but just sort of haven't made time for it. But then this year I was like, you know what? These are athletes. This is a population that means a lot to me. As I mentioned, my older sibling has a disability, and it's a population that's really feeling the stress and pain of this pandemic, with social isolation and losing access to community resources, engagement, growth, some even health services and things like that. So I thought, you know what, if there was ever a year to just make time for it, this was the year. So I started coaching with them. I teach yoga, And that has also been a part of my self-care now, even if it is time out of my week spent doing something else. It's so important to me.
It sounds like quite a busy life you've got, Hillary.
But you made time for us, and I want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. When this was brought up, I knew this was something I definitely wanted to do, and I really appreciate you guys having me back on. I've loved following along over the years, and I really am so happy that this is still going and still a part of the School of Social Welfare. I think it's so unique and valuable and important, and it's great that you guys keep it going as well.
Yeah, there are a lot of social work podcasts out there, and we love those podcasts, and there's some great resources for folks. But I think we are the only school of social work that we know of that has a live radio talk show where we certainly do the archive podcast, and folks can listen in that format if they want. But we also, at least, when the pandemic allows, have a live studio session where we interview folks live on the air, and it goes out over the FM airwaves. So that's always been an important aspect of the social workers show for us.
Yeah. And also that we have a lot of our social work community on too. So it's our field instructors, our community partners, our alums, even our students who are doing, they're talking about their experience in their field placements or the classroom. So we really try to capture all different aspects of social work from different points of views where people are in their lives. And I think that's one of the unique things about our show. It's not just bringing on an expert in the field. It's really how do we talk to everyone who is in our social work community and get that perspective and have them share their knowledge and expertise. And we do love especially having our alums on to show sort of the path that they took after graduation, because social work is such a broad profession. And I loved hearing your story today of how you went from one place to another and built on all of those experiences to get you where you are right now.
And, speaking of paths and stories, Hillary, I can't let you leave without asking the last question, which is, what do you see after getting your MBA? What's the longer term picture for you, do you think?
Well, as Alyssa mentioned, having those long-term plans, but also with the caveat of this may happen or it may not at all happen. But ideally, I would like to combine the MBA and the MSW degrees and return back to either higher education, so staying at an institution, but being more social work focused. Right now, I'm at a clinical and translational science research center, which I don't know much about as far as expertise. So I would like to get back into that, either staying in higher education or going into the nonprofit sector and working on creating a sustainable, either starting my own nonprofit or adding my skills and expertise to one that exists and focus on sustainability of long-term impact, long-term existence, and what that means, what that looks like, and the decisions that have to go into that with a business and a social work perspective.
Great. Thanks so much for talking with us, Hillary. Again, if you've just tuned in, you've been listening to an interview here on The Social Workers with Hillary Dolinsky. Hillary, we really appreciate you coming back. You're one of the original co-hosts of this show. And so not just an alumna of the School of Social Welfare at the University of Albany, but also an alumna of WCDB and the Social Workers Show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thanks, Hillary.
We look forward to having you on the show again in the future. I'll just say that, the invitation is open. And if you want to come back at any point and update us, we're always open to having you back.
Absolutely. You got it.
So you've been listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany. My name is Eric Hardiman, and I've been here with Alyssa Lutmore and Hillary Dolinsky. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.